me. Yes, well, that's my name. And this works. Great. Who am I? Well, I'm a biologist by training, which gives me an edge in science communication, because biologists know about everything, about physics, about chemistry, about biology, about medicine. I actually did a PhD and a postdoc at the Utrecht University Medical Center a long time ago. Hang on, you don't hear me?
Yeah. We can.
Is het al aan?
Volgens mij moet je microfoontje iets dichterbij, hoor.
Ja, dat is een Yep. Yes. Right. Okay. Great. Okay, well, for the last 8 or so, I've been working as a science journalist here in Groningen for the university newspaper, and also some freelance work. And as from last year, I work as a science writer for Science Links, which is the science center of the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, which means there's a lot of science in my job. Science Links tries to connect the outside world to the university, especially school children. And we do that by making exhibits, by being there at big festivals, by touring schools, and for example, things like, not just sure if you're aware of the IRBA presentation at the ground floor there in the new IRBA building. We help making those as well. So, translating your research into a really gripping story. Now, maybe it's a disappointment, but this afternoon you won't learn how to do that exactly. Because writing isn't a science, it's an art. So it's a bit like medicine, actually. You can't learn it from a book. You can only learn it by doing it. So, what I'm going to tell you are some basics, some ideas, some concepts. Listen to them, see which fit, which suit you, but don't try to copy a method. So I'll be talking about why you should write about science in the first place. I'll be talking about short stories, how to start writing, some checklists, and how to get published. And again, this is not a comprehensive course, just a couple of loose ideas. Now, in the program, I think it said interactive. That was before I knew there were about 160 of you. So that makes interactive a bit difficult, but I'll do something interactive now. Would you please all stand up? Right? Because good writing starts in the library, reading. There are some pretty good books on the shelf. I saw that. My shelf just ripped from the internet. So, I'm going to ask you a question. If you think back for about 1 month, 4 weeks, have you read at least one novel, so a work of fiction, and because I'm in a generous mood, I'll throw in biographies. So, everyone who's read at least one novel or biography, remain standing, the rest please sit down. Okay? Now you probably know what's coming next. 2. And if you read 3, okay, 4. Okay, so these people read 1 book a week. I should say we give them applause. The reader in front there, with the microphone, which novel she's read. You there, yeah.
The last 3 parts of Suki Stackhouse. Yeah. And I think it was Sleepless Nights, but then in Dutch it was not good. It was a novel, but...
Okay. Reading actually helps you to learn how to write. So, do by all means read books, read novels, read popular science stories, because it will help you to learn how to write. Now, why should you write? Why should you write about your own research? The first thing, it's fun. It's fun, because, I mean, how many of you are enjoying your work? Yeah, well, okay. You're doing something you enjoy. You're doing something that really excites you, doing research. You'd like to tell your grandchild about it, which is a bit deaf. You know, how are you going to tell her? That's a challenge, but it's fun to share what you're doing, what really makes you tick. The other thing is, of course, that taxpayers want to know what you're doing. If you're doing a PhD, you're usually funded by a government organization, which is funded by the taxpayer. If you're here on a scholarship from the Dutch Kidney Foundation or a Heart Foundation, it's even worse, because then you're actually spending the money that people have put into the box on the doorstep. So, you want to explain what you're doing. A third reason to do this is because a popular summary is nowadays part of a grant application. So you really have to do that to get money. And you're all experts. Perhaps you don't realize that, perhaps you don't feel like an expert, but once you've done 3-4 years in the lab, on a particular subject, you're an expert. You might give an expert opinion on something. Now, popular science, it should be short, simple, and if at all possible, spectacular. Of course, there are these long 2,000 words, 3,000 words, longer even stories, but that's probably not for you as to start with. So keep it short, keep it simple, and be as spectacular as you can be. A typical science story, I mean, that's about 400 to 600 words. I worked for a newspaper for 16 years, a university newspaper. When I started out there, a full page contains 1,700 words. And we could do a one-page feature on research. When I left, a full page contained 1,000 words. And it should be in at least 2 parts. You can't have 1,000 words in one story. Perish the thought. So you can have an opinion on this. You can say, well, that's not, it's not long enough. Well, that's tough for you, because that's what the public wants. Web-based, it's really 400 to 600. Print, it may be a little bit longer, but not much. So, if you're going to write about science, you're going to write a short story, not a novel. Now, short, it doesn't mean condensed. This horrible jar has all the essence of coffee. But it's not coffee. Take a spoonful, put it in your mouth, it's horrible. Don't condense your story. This is also very small. And this is not condensed. This is just tiny bits, flavors that combine, and it's lovely to eat. Now, even if you do have 2,000 words, it has to be a meal, a balanced meal. It doesn't have to be a buffet. If you have 2,000 words and you throw in everything, you know, chips, vegetables, meat, the whole lot, you know, that's not very appetizing. You are writing a story. Now that's important. Because you used to think about your research as something, you know, which is all these facts together with a hypothesis and conclusion, stuff like that. That's not the way to approach a popular science story. You have to have a story with a a beginning, an end, and a bit in the middle that connects the two. You're not shooting off as much information as you can to an unsuspecting public. You are going to tell them a story about what you're doing. Now, I'll try to tell you a little bit about how to write this story. First, of course, you have to know what you're going to write. You sit down, you have this empty screen in front of you. What are you going to do? Well, there are roughly 3 ways to start. You can plan every bit, you can sort of make a schedule for every paragraph. You can write and then sort of do a word count every 10 minutes, and if you reach the limit, you sort of stop. Oh yeah, that was a third actually. The second is you can simply write, and then you have 2,000 words, and you cut it back to 500. Now, again, a little bit of interaction. I'd like to have your votes, please, on which method is best. There are 4 choices. There's the planning, writing and then cutting back, writing and count and stop when you reach your count, or it doesn't matter which. So can I have the vote for number 1? Votes for number 2? Votes for number 3? Okay, and vote for number 4. Right. Now, there is no right answer to this question actually. It was a trick question. Most of you like the write and cut approach, which is very decent, about as good as planning, but they all have their drawbacks. The last option, writing until you've reached your quotum and then stop, that's a recipe for disaster, because it's not going to be a real story. It will not develop. It will just stop. Now, option B can run the flow of your story. If you just start cutting back from a larger story, then you will have bits and pieces from the story all put together. It will not have a really decent flow. And if you plan everything ahead, you may end up with a patient information leaflet instead of a story. Now, what you have to do is choose an approach which works for you. I'm more a guy who sort of lets it sit in his head, and then after a while starts writing, and I usually have a good idea what the rhythm should be, and I can sort of write it in the right length. But maybe you're a planner. Well, by all means plan. Maybe you like to cut back and then smooth out and stuff like that. By all means do that. It's an art, not a science. What is important is to know in advance what you're going to write. Just like Martin just said, you have to know your story before you tell it. So make a list. What's vital to know? What's just nice to know? Of course, when you just think of it the first time, everything is vital, because it's all your research. But what's really vital to your audience? Now, if you've made your first draft of your story, then check if all the facts are in there actually, if all the vital facts are there. Now, when you start writing a story, you have to begin somewhere. This is how a football match starts. 22 people, very static, the ball is in the middle, the referee whistles and it goes like this. Not very exciting. It's a good way to start, because you have to start somewhere, but it's not very exciting. No one is really thrilled by the kickoff. Not really. However, if Federer tries to serve, he gets the ball in play just as well. But then everyone is really on edge. What's going to happen? This is really an ace. If you start writing, don't just kick off. Try making an ace. Now, well, you can take out pen and paper, or you could just think of it. But can you just think of 2 or 3 favorite opening lines from novels? I'll give you about 20 seconds. So you have to think long words. Nothing to do. Yeah. So, opening lines for novels.
I got two. Call Me Ishmael
Huh.
is one, or... Oh, I had one. Oh, anyone else?
Well, call me Ishmael, that's a good one, because I had that one too. Why is Call Me Ishmael a good opening line? Anyone?
It's intriguing.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Why is it intriguing? Well, it says Call Me Ishmael, which means, the information contained in that is that the guy who is telling the story isn't called Ishmael. He says, call me Ishmael. Why does he want to be called that? Why does he want to be known with his own name? So it intrigues. It raises questions. It's just a few words and it intrigues. It actually peaks right away. Anyone else? Opening line.
Well, the opening line translated on the spot from Russian into English. Finally, something started to get clearer.
Sorry?
Finally, something started to get clear.
Okay. Well, that's intriguing as well, because it again makes you think, what's clear?
The one from Pride and Prejudice, it's a truth universally acknowledged that every man with a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
Well, that certainly will get the conversation started. I think it's the anniversary of Pride and Prejudice this year, isn't it? 200 years, I think. Something like that. So, now a good opening line, it will get your attention somehow by raising a question, by suggesting something. Now, a good opening line can be factual, but it will still be an ace. What you need to do is try to relate to the public. Get their interest. And don't make it too long. Now, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's quite good. But actually this line goes on and on and on and on. So no one knows the rest. I've got two opening lines for you. I made them both up. So now this is the first one, and you might recognize this sort of stuff. You know, not sure if it really makes sense, but the whole genome analysis of trypanosomes brucei has provided new leads for the pharmaceutical agents to combat African trypanosomiasis. Yes, well. You could also say it like this. Seen it? You spotted the difference? The first one is shorter. But which one would make the average reader continue to read? It's not all about length, is it? You know. Okay. You got your opening line, you got your opening paragraph, you got your opening paragraphs. Then you get the middle bit, you know, just before the end. You set the scene with your opening lines and you're going to develop the story. You're going to tell what you've done and why you've done it. You're going to share results. By all means, use anecdotes if you have them, because people like to know how researchers go about their business. What happened? How did it happen? Not just factual, but try to put in some emotion as well. So, and remember, you're writing a short story. You're not making freeze-dried coffee. So you're not trying to get as many facts in as possible in these 400 words. You're trying to tell a story. And after you've developed your story, we get into that later in more detail, you have the catharsis, everything comes together, it's wonderful, bells are ringing, and well, there's a bright and shiny future ahead of us all. And you're going to do that in just two or three paragraphs. I've been generous. So you have to do all that in a very short space. Are there any questions so far? Might be. Two. And we just move on. And we're going to look at the one-slide story. Can you get a story in one slide? Yes, you can. If you use a really tiny lettering. No, you don't have to do that. You can just write very brief. We can write about, this is a fairy tale. So a fairy tale has a prince and a princess. So we write, once upon a time, a prince set out to rescue a princess who was locked away in a tower. Now that's basic fairy tale business. We all know what this looks like. You know, you have a prince, you don't have to tell where it came from. The princess, who cares? I mean, she probably has blonde, long hair, stuff like that, blue eyes. The tower, it's a big tower, it's a nasty tower, we all know that, so you don't have to put it in. So this prince, you know, he gets on his noble steed, and he goes to rescue this princess. Well, what happens? Of course, he runs into a band of ruffians. And they guard the road to the tower. Now, we don't know how many ruffians, we don't know how they look, how they're armed, you know, how many eyes they got. It's not important. Of course, the prince then draws his sword and sort of, you know, wins the battle. They always do. Again, no details on his techniques. He just slaughtered them all. Once he arrives at the tower, he does what princes do. He looks for the door, but can't find it, of course, because it's a magical tower, stuff like that. I don't know why, but he can't find the door, so he climbs up. Of course, there's this handy balcony. And we really don't know, you know, the vine, what's the vine is it? Who cares? It's a vine, you can climb up. Now, if it was raining and the vine was extremely slippery, it might be interesting information to put into it. But if it's not, forget it. And, you know, every single lady is in want for a man. We've just heard that. So she rises up, doesn't say, well, who the heck are you? What are you doing in life? She just embraces him. They exchange true lover's kiss and they live happily ever after. So we've got an entire fairy story here in just one slide. How did I do that? Well, you just follow the main line of the story. Don't put any unnecessary stuff in there. Leave out lots and lots and lots. You know, if you leave out all the vowels from a sentence, you can still read it. Now, I don't recommend it for a science story. But you can leave out a lot more than you think from your story. And that's a serious point, because you want to cram in everything you've done, everything you know, but you shouldn't do that. See what's really vital, what's really the essence of your story. You can add flavor, you can add color, you can add anecdotes, but don't try to spell out all the details of what you've done. And that's a very important lesson for you scientists, because you always want to spell out all the details, because that's what you're trained to do. And that's perfect when you're writing a scientific article, but it's rubbish when you're trying to reach a wider public. I put in a formula just to prove this. For C is complexity and I is information. If C exceeds I, that spells trouble. You usually lose about 10% of your audience with each formula, I'm informed. So, well. All right, very quick test. What's wrong with this abstract?
It's not split into
Yeah, it's in Latin, I know, but apart from that. Anyone? Hands, please? You shout.
Well, it's not split into sections.
Great. This is just, this looks horrible, even for Latin. Please, please, please don't ignore the enter button on your computer. Because text isn't just information. If you open something to read and you see the text, the first thing you get there is the look of it. So if it's all one big grey blur, people that are not really interested to read it. If they see this, they say, oh no, we're going to start on that. So, make paragraphs, and just not just after every 3 lines you use bang. Because a paragraph is actually a chapter in your story. A paragraph is a scene in your movie. Every scene in a movie has a winner. Every scene has its own little story inside the story. So every paragraph should be a sort of contained unit of information. Now, once you've written a story, the best thing is to put it aside and come back next day. Ask a friend to read it, and not a friend from the lab, but someone from the real world, outside. Also, you should check what you've written. Is it really right? Is it really the essence? Is it really the vital information? Is it all there? And is it really relating to something the public wants to know? Is it really interesting? Is there a storyline, or are you just sort of emptying all your information out onto the paper? Is there a story? Is there a build-up of tension? Is there a catharsis? Is there a story? And very important, is the main message of your research actually represented in the story? And did you cut out all the good jargon? Did you really cut out all the jargon? And there should be a third line here, which I forgot to put in, but is, after you've really cut out all the jargon, have you explained the remaining jargon? Because sometimes jargon is actually necessary for your work, or you feel it's necessary, but then you have to explain what it is. Just a couple of, innocent sentences like, our experiments have provided additional evidence to suggest, you know them. But you could write them differently, That's much shorter. That's much clearer. I actually met a guy, he was from Belgium, he was a doctor, and he thought that P larger than 0.05 was significant. He ended up in the Lancet with his paper, after corrections. Now you have these potentially pathogenic species in the microbial community, otherwise known as harmful bugs. It's not as accurate, but it's much more fun to read, really. Now, the Dutch audience will know these two chaps, boy and girl, and dog. These are Jip and Janneke. And we've got a saying in Dutch, which is Jip and Janneke language. Simple language. Jip and Janneke and their dog, they're instantly recognizable, but they lack an awful lot of details. They're just two-dimensional drawings, and I really mean two-dimensional. They're flat. The eye is just a hole in the head there. But they're clear. They really represent their forms. They really have emotions, even though they are flat. The dog has lots of emotions there. It's just a flat dog. But it works well. So don't tell me you can't just simplify your research. If you can flatten the human being and still have it as real as this, it's possible. So, how am I faring? Oh, I'm doing good. Now, just some thoughts. The slides are going to be on the website, so you can read all these wonderful tips there. I've talked about technical terms before. They should be clear and unambiguous. Not just unambiguous to you, but unambiguous to your great aunt. There should be a logical path from the beginning to the end. There should be a question. You start with a problem, you tell what you did, and you tell a solution. That's the basic idea. The most important information should be there. Because if you make a popular story, it shouldn't be watered down. It should be the real science. Science communication is not you know, getting on your knees and saying da 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 da, you know, making it like you're talking to a 3-year-old. No, you should really tell the real science there, the real science that is happening, but tell it in a way that people understand it. Did you stress your own brilliance? Well, we don't do that as scientists, do we? No. But you know, it might be useful sometimes. Have you exceeded the word limit? If you have exceeded the word limit and you have you know, agreed with an editor to hand in 500 words and you do 600, he'll cut out 100. And he'll do that. And you won't, you know, you won't cut out the right words in your opinion. So please make it at the right length. If you've really been working on a story, you know, with your word processing program, you've been moving text about and stuff like that, what you end up with are a lot of errors. Like referring words that don't refer to anything. You know, therefore, and there's nothing before that. So read it careful for those sort of editing and cut and paste errors, because they're going to be a couple, at least. The least you should do is have the spell checker on your word processor working. Yeah, because it really looks awful if you have all these spelling errors in it. If you're not a native speaker, if you write in a different language, have it read by and checked by a native speaker. That's very useful. I didn't do that with these slides, and maybe if there's a native English speaker here, he or she may have spotted quite a few errors. If I write something in English and it's going online on the website of Science Links, I always have it checked beforehand. Now, what makes a good popular science story? I can say now a whole lot of things there, but what I just want to stress now is basically it should be understandable for a lay person. So your great aunt, your neighbor, whatever, someone who doesn't know your field should be able to understand it. It should also be a good representation of the real science, the real results. And I underline representation. I also make it bold and in italics. That means it's a pretty big word in this sentence. Your story is not your science. It's not the real science. It is a representation of your science. It should be a proper representation, but you can't put all your science in there. You have to make it, you have to change it, you have to adapt it so that it can be understood. So it's a representation. And preferably, somewhere you have this wow factor, where people really think, hang on, this is interesting, this is intriguing. I want to spend more money on that. I want the government to spend more money on that. Any questions so far? No? You all asleep? No. Then we go on to the difficult bit, because once you've written a great story, maybe you want to get it published somewhere. Now that's complicated. Anyway, you've got basically 3 different types of story you might be writing. A popular summary for a grant application or a thesis. No problem getting that published, of course, because you have to fill it in. You may have written a science story or an op-ed opinion. Now, as a rule, newspapers do not accept submitted stories by scientists. We journalists think we can always do it better. We're the professionals, you know. So if you send in a story to a newspaper, they're probably going to say, well, not my idea, not invented here, so. You can always try. If you're really important, if you really got a big reputation, if you probably haven't yet, they might let you write something. You can pitch an idea. But if you have a really newsworthy story, you can always try to inform the communications office. Now they may not always respond, and if you think it's really important, you can pitch it to a journal, to a reporter. And it might be handy if you just written something and put it on your website and refer someone to it. But getting a science story published in a newspaper, that's difficult. There's also an element of luck in there, because if there's a real lack of stories that we, you may get in. But if there are just someone just cloned human stem cells, then you're not going to get in. Now, as Michael already said, there are also special interest journals. There are also websites which will let you write. There's the Dutch website Science Palooza, on which scientists can actually write themselves. There are probably dozens of those sites. Just surf the internet, try Google, and see where you can get your story published. Science blogging, it's something you might really want to consider, because it brings out your message across to the public. It helps you to tell you what you're doing with all this taxpayer money. And it's fun. You can get response to it. Now, even if you don't get published, writing about your own work actually helps you also to get the really important bits sorted out. What am I doing? And it helps you also in, if you know how to write a story, it helps you to write a grant application. It helps you to write a scientific paper. It helps you to write an abstract. If you want to write an opinion, again, I said at the beginning, you are experts. You don't know that, perhaps. But if you spend a couple of years on one subject, you're an expert. There are not many people in the world who know more about it than you. So it may very well be that you can write an opinion for a newspaper. Choose where you want to publish. Preferably contact an editor by phone. You can send an email, but phone is more direct. And explain what you want to write. And I think this is important because the voice of scientific reason should be heard. There are all these opinions floating around on the internet. You as a scientist, I think I could even say you have an obligation to tell people how things really are. There's a paper out, I think today, which says that in 12,000 scientific papers on climate change, only published over the last 10 years, only 3% actually challenge the idea of human-induced global warming. The vast majority of climate scientists is totally convinced the evidence says that we humans are messing with our climate. If you look at opinion polls, people think it's about 50-50. So let your voice be heard, because you're the expert. Not on climate change, but on biomedical stuff. Hang on, that was the wrong one. Got it. Now, if you're promoting your own work, your own science, it's not something you're used to, it's not something you're trained to do. You're supposed to talk about we all the time, because you're the one who's, at midnight you're still in the lab, and you have to say we because the professor, it doesn't make you feel like this guy if you promote yourself. Well, what are you selling? You're not selling, this. You're not even selling that, which looks much more decent. What you are selling is that's you. You're the expert. You've got something to tell. I started out with this bookshelf. Do read some good popular science books. My all-time favorite is Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. If you haven't read it, go out to the shop, buy it. It's wonderful. Now, if you really want to know how you can write an interesting science story, if you're in the shop, buy, this is a very recent book, well, the Dutch translation is recent, Chet Orzel, How to Teach Quantum Physics to Your Dog. It's a wonderful book. Yes, the dog in there is also wonderful. It's Queen Susie, she's called, and it's a great dog. And if you read it, I can promise you, you start understanding quantum physics. Also read science supplements, read popular science blogs, read, and then write. Write. Because you have to do a lot of writing before you're really an accomplished writer. So, if you've got a good story to tell, and to sort of draw you out a bit, if any of you thinks, well, this really is inspiring, so at least you haven't dozed off yet, and you really want to try your luck at writing about your own research, I have an offer for you. The first 5 of you who write something about their own work, or science, anything, a popular science story, before the 3rd of June, you always need deadlines, you know that, so 2 weeks time to write a good story. The first 5, send it to me, and you'll get a review from me. Best thing to send it through the, so where should the mail send it to?
It's your email address, everyone has it.
The general email address.
Yeah.
So the first 5, I'll leave it to you if you make it, the first come, first go, or whatever. I'll guarantee 5 reviews for you.
Amy, you don't count.
Well, I'm not sure. Okay. That's it.
I can imagine someone has a question, yes.
Thank you for this interesting talk. So you have training as a biologist, so you're a scientist yourself. But is scientific